TuHURA has an antibody drug conjugate construct. And does it make sense to combine your anti-VISTA TBS 2025 with your Delta Opioid Receptor to use those in combination?
Yep, and absolutely. So I mentioned that VISTA is overexpressed on the myeloid compartment. That includes expression on MDSCs, macrophages, and in the setting for AML in leukemia. And so if you're able to shut off immunosuppression by blocking the Delta Opioid Receptor and then blocking VISTA on, for example, B cells and T cells, you now essentially allow T cells to wake up. They're no longer sleeping or quiescent from the role of VISTA. And that should give you a very potent ability to remove immunosuppression and activate an immune response. And we think that that's a totally novel. Matter of fact, we know it's a totally novel approach. We are the only company, to my knowledge, that are developing immune targeting antibody drug conjugates instead of tumor targeting antibody drug conjugates. And I can go into that in more detail if you like.
Yeah, that sounds interesting. Well, I was going to also mention that, ADCs are one of the most attractive areas in oncology, and there have been a number of acquisitions there. And
I think if you turn the clock back, you look at the Pfizer acquisition of Seagen, right? Seagen pioneered this whole field after Pfizer bought Seagen for $43 billion.
Right.
Amgen bought a single asset ADC from a Japanese company, I'm blocking out the name, for $3 billion. There were a host of acquisitions in the multi-billion-dollar range, including one for $1 billion in a preclinical stage company. The novelty of what we're doing, and this is why I think this will come under a lot of positive scrutiny, especially now with the scientific validation at ASH, from the pharma community, and I'll say why. The original application for an antibody drug conjugate, so they use an antibody to target a target on a tumor cell, and they carry with it a payload. The first generation had payloads which were cell toxins, right? They would kill the cell. And the way those ADCs would work is that the antibody gets taken into the cell, right? So it has to be internalized, and it carries with it the payload, which is the chemotherapy, if you will. So that was the first generation, so which used an antibody cytotoxic conjugate. Conjugate just means combining it to or linking it to. The next generation looked at, well, if chemotherapy kills tumor cells, there are other ways to do that. There are protein degraders. There are ways to inhibit the cell cycle, i.e. prevent these cells from dividing. That was kind of the next generation, right? The non-cytotoxic, but they still target a tumor, get internalized, and then prevent the cells from dividing. The last generation and most recent were called checkpoint ADCs. So they'll take VEGF, which is a target on lung cancer, for example, and they'll tie to it Keytruda, PD-1, an anti-PD-1 checkpoint inhibitor. And again, that gets internalized. The PD-1 essentially blocks the ability of the tumor to prevent a T cell from being activated. Those are called checkpoint ADCs. You notice they all have one thing in common. They all target a tumor. We have what we call immune modulating ADCs. So two differences. First thing is the antibody that we're using, VISTA, that's targeting the VISTA receptor on T cells to allow them to wake up. And we're linking that to the drug. And in this case, the payload isn't a cytotoxic and it isn't targeting a tumor. It is actually targeting the Delta Opioid Receptor. So we have the first set of drugs, that antibody drug conjugates, that are not internalized. They are not cytotoxic, but in fact, they will target the microenvironment. They'll bind to this Delta Opioid Receptor on immune suppressing cells, remove that immunosuppression, while at the same time VISTA releasing T cells from being kept quiet and allowing them to become activated. So our ADCs target the tumor microenvironment, not the tumor. And we're the only ones, to my knowledge, that are doing that. I certainly know we're the only ones doing it by targeting the Delta Opioid Receptor linked to a VISTA inhibiting antibody. That I'm confident on, because if you look at any of the patent literature that's out there, it's all us.